You checked the locks twice. You replayed a conversation, word for word, from 6 years ago. You took the long way home, again, just to breathe. They call it overthinking. But what if it's not a problem to fix, but a signal to decode? You always thought you were just being cautious, rehearsing exits, reading between every line, not because you wanted to, but because your mind wouldn't let go. But what if it was something else? What if these quiet, forgettable habits are signs you process the world differently? Not broken, not slow, just ahead. Because high intelligence doesn't show up with trophies. It shows up in routines no one notices. Habits you never questioned. Behaviors you thought were boring. But behind those habits is a pattern, a quiet, unshakable pattern. And once you see it, you'll never see yourself the same way again. Because here's the paradox. The smarter the mind, the stranger the ritual. You check your phone but hate small talk. You walk into rooms and sense the tension before anyone speaks. You zone out in the middle of conversations, not from disinterest, but from depth. You think that's normal. It's not. It's signal. Highly intelligent people don't walk around calling themselves geniuses. They walk around wondering why they can't turn their brain off, why noise hurts, why they can't fake enthusiasm, why they remember every word of a conversation from 6 years ago, and they think something's wrong with them because no one told them the truth. Your intelligence hides in how you survive, in what you notice, in the rituals you never gave language, in the questions you never stop asking. You might not have the test scores, or the medals, or the applause, but your mind is tracking everything. And the world doesn't always reward that. It calls you overthinker, sensitive, too intense, too serious. But what it really means is we don't see what you see. And in the next few minutes, you're going to see 7 habits you've never thought twice about. But that silently proves just how rare your cognition really is. Because you don't need to change your habits. You need to see them. And once you do, you won't wish to be normal again. You'll wish you'd known sooner. Let's begin. You're not exhausted because you do too much. You're exhausted because you notice too much. The tension in someone's voice, the gap between their words and their eyes, the unspoken rule no one mentions but everyone obeys. You register it all, before others have even adjusted, before the conversation has even begun. And it's not a superpower, it's a burden. You walk into a room and instantly rearrange yourself. You read the air, the body language, the power dynamics. And by the time someone says, "How are you?" you've already predicted 10 outcomes and chosen the safest one. They call you shy. You're not shy. You're calculating. You're mapping how much of yourself can safely exist here. You hesitate before speaking, not because you lack thoughts, but because you've already imagined how they'll be received, misinterpreted, weaponized. This isn't self-doubt. It's cognitive foresight. You don't interrupt, not because you're passive, but because you're watching how people listen. You withdraw, not because you're disinterested, but because the noise is too much. The chaos, too shallow. The surface, unbearable. They think you're quiet, but your silence is louder than they know. Because in your silence, you're running simulations, social scenarios, emotional probabilities, thought spirals. You're not zoning out, you're zooming in. You notice everything except your own exhaustion. You anticipate everyone except yourself. And that's the cost. No one taught you how to turn it off. No one gave you a manual for a mind that processes too deeply to rest, so you adapted. You masked your patterns as politeness. You hid your depth behind diplomacy. You told yourself this is just how people are, that you're too sensitive, too much. But the truth is, you are processing reality at a volume they can't hear. You adjust your tone mid-sentence. You catch inconsistencies in logic. You feel the emotional drop in a room before anyone speaks. And instead of being celebrated for it, You were told to stop overthinking, but this isn't overthinking. It's overseeing. It's not hesitation, it's simulation. It's not detachment, it's discernment. You were never slow. You were calculating the emotional cost of being honest. And now, you're tired, not because you're weak, but because you've been processing without pause. Your brain is a lens, your nervous system an antenna. You absorb data others never register, and all this time, you've mistaken it for a flaw. But it's not a flaw, it's a signal. You've never been broken, you've been processing too much. And now you're about to see why. You were told your patterns were problems, your rituals eccentric, your silence awkward. But what if they were signals? What if every strange habit you carry is the nervous system of an intelligence tuned too sharply for the noise of this world? They told you to soften, to simplify, to just be normal. But normal never felt like home, because you weren't built to follow scripts. You were built to track signal. And now it's time to stop hiding your intelligence inside your habits and start seeing the habits for what they really are. Proof. 1. You speak to the air like it's a witness, because silence doesn't calm you, it multiplies you. And narrating your day, that's not eccentric, that's cognitive relief. No camera, no crowd, just you, whispering your thoughts into the air. Planning, reframing, analyzing. You walk through doorways, mid-conversation with yourself. They call it weird. They say you overthink. But this isn't overthinking, it's processing. Your mind isn't disorganized, it's hyper-organized. It doesn't run on silence, it runs on rehearsal. This isn't madness, it's self-refining cognition, a sign of linguistic simulation. What others mock as rambling is your brain tuning the instrument before performance. Your words aren't mistakes, they're weapons of precision. And once you notice that, something else becomes impossible to ignore. 2. You pause mid-sentence, then start again. Not because you're confused, but because the sentence felt wrong halfway through. You sensed it wouldn't land right. You recalibrated, adjusted tone, edited for impact. This isn't social anxiety, it's verbal precision. You feel language, you don't just use it. Every word you speak carries a cost, and your mind calculates before you pay it. You aren't lost in memory, you're testing alternative futures. Because before you can speak again, your mind needs rehearsal. 3. You're in line at the pharmacy. Fluorescent lights, a kid crying. The woman in front of you just said something that reminds you of something that happened 5 years ago. Your stomach shifts. Your brain replays it. The betrayal, the sentence you never got to say, the script you still rehearse, just in case the past shows up asking for a second take. You're not stuck. You're rehearsing, not to relive it, but to survive it if it happens again. They call it spiraling. You know it as contingency planning. Your silence isn't escape, it's a security perimeter. Only when truth feels unsafe does your intelligence shut the door. 4. You hesitate before revealing how you really feel. You say, "I'm fine," even when you're carrying a storm. Not because you're scared, but because you've learned truth has consequences. Your opinion, your depth, your insight, they shift rooms, they rattle people. And you calculate, is this space calibrated enough to hold the truth? You're not withholding, you're safeguarding. That's not fear, that's emotional intelligence. Small talk isn't harmless. It's static that consumes bandwidth. And when the channel noise rises, your system clicks off. 5. You loathe small talk, and it drains you. You smile through it, you nod, but every shallow exchange feels like static in your skull. It's not snobbery, it's energetic sensitivity. Your system doesn't respond to filler. It's calibrated for substance. You crave signal, not scripts. That's not antisocial, that's discerning. These aren't quirks, they're technologies, patterns born from cognitive density, running in the background of your personality. Now watch what happens next. But there's more than collusion with silence. There's complete withdrawal. Not because you're bored, but because the signal dropped too low. 6. You're in a meeting. Everyone's laughing at a joke the boss made. You smile, barely, but inside, you've already left. Because halfway through the pitch, something didn't add up. Tone didn't match intention. Energy didn't match words. And the moment the signal dropped, so did your presence. You're not distracted. You're discerning. Your body stayed. But your cognition left the room 5 minutes ago because it refuses to participate in shallow resonance. A sharp mind doesn't accept boxes. It sees through them. And once you've scanned the framework, the rules collapse. 7. You don't just challenge rules. You see through them. You were the kid who asked, why? You're the adult who still does. You spot the loopholes, the contradictions, the power plays dressed up as policies. You don't rebel for fun. You rebel for clarity. You're not defiant. You're structurally awake. Your intelligence doesn't submit, it scrutinizes. Intuition isn't magic, it's atmospheric perception. Because words are cheap, but energy never lies. 8. You meet someone new. They say, nice to meet you. But their energy says, don't get close. And you feel it before the handshake even lands. The chill in their tone, the shift in their blink. Your skin reacts before your mind explains. Because to you, words don't matter unless they match the temperature. What they avoid, what they flinch from. You track tone. You register silence. You sense tension 5 seconds before it's spoken. And when the air gets heavy, you carry it. This isn't moodiness, it's atmospheric empathy. You read energy, not words. And that reading never turns off. Memory isn't nostalgic drama, it's forensic evidence. And you're not collecting moments, you're building the case. 9. You remember details no one else even noticed. The word they repeated, the inflection that changed, the glance they didn't mean to give. You carry micro-expressions like data. This isn't oversensitivity, it's forensic cognition. You don't just hear what's said, you record the unsaid. And later, when they rewrite the narrative, you remember the exact frame. Pain doesn't pass, it performs diagnostics. It's not a flaw to forget, but a force to analyze. 10. You struggle to let go. You're brushing your teeth, but you're not here. You're 4 years ago, a conversation, a fracture, a glance you keep replaying, not to re-feel it, but to decode it. You don't let go easily, because your mind doesn't flush pain, it files it. Every betrayal, every rupture, stored and reanalyzed, not out of bitterness, but to catch the pattern before it repeats. They call it brooding. You know it's diagnostics. They called it dysfunction. You called it memory. Your mind archived every scar like a survival map. Not because you couldn't let go, but because your mind refuses to forget the fire. Because every memory becomes a pattern. Every pattern, a warning. But they never saw that. They didn't understand the density of your processing, the depth of your architecture, the weight of your perception. You weren't overthinking. You were seeing clearly, just too early. And just when you try to explain what you've archived, you feel it again, the compression. And all this complexity needs a voice. But the world only offers low fidelity. So you compress your signal, chasing clarity. 11. You mistranslate yourself constantly. You say 60% of what you mean, then watch it land like 10%. You simplify, adjust, cut corners, because the full thought would lose them. So you edit your mind down to fit the moment. But your real cognition is too fast, too layered, too multidimensional for most rooms. This isn't imposter syndrome, it's bandwidth mismatch. You don't doubt your mind, You doubt the world's ability to hold it. And that's not a weakness, it's a sign of surplus. You've walked your whole life with this tension between depth and distortion, insight and invisibility. But now the distortion ends because you've seen the signal, and now you understand the system that produced it. You were never strange. You were never slow. You were never broken. You were running on frequencies no one taught you how to name. Now you know. And knowing is power. You don't need to change. You need to see. Because everything they told you was too much, was a pattern recognition they couldn't understand. And now, you're not shrinking for comfort. You're expanding with clarity. They called it overthinking, but it was foresight. They called it social awkwardness, but it was signal fatigue. They called it being distant, but you were discerning the room before stepping into it. You were never detached. You were absorbing, simulating, calculating how much of yourself could survive the interaction. They misnamed it all because they couldn't see past the surface, because you had been trained to camouflage your depth for their comfort. But comfort is not clarity, and silence is not peace. And now you are done leaking your power through politeness. Every habit you carry has a function, a route, a signal. And when you stop performing for recognition, you start integrating for reality. Reality is this. Your mind doesn't just think, it maps. It maps emotional weather. It scans psychic inconsistencies. It tracks pattern, motive, tone, outcome. Your fatigue isn't weakness. It's the nervous system of a person who has spent their entire life translating the invisible. Integration doesn't mean fixing anything. It means stopping the bleeding of self into others. You stop explaining why you pause before you speak. You stop apologizing for wanting solitude. You stop justifying your dislike of small talk, your obsession with accuracy, your need to feel the subtext before responding. You stop leaking. Because when you were misunderstood, you tried to earn understanding by editing yourself, by softening your shape, by compressing your mind into a socially acceptable signal. But intelligence doesn't compress, it contains. And now so do you. Your silence now has edges. Your withdrawal is no longer shame, it's strategy. Your habit of vanishing from chaotic rooms, that's not weakness, that's a self-preservation as intelligence. They used to read it as fragility. Now they'll feel it as gravity. You are not here to match energy. You are here to hold signal. The kind of signal that doesn't panic, doesn't perform, doesn't chase applause to feel real. Because you've seen what happens when you collapse your cognition to fit a room not built for it. It poisons you, dilutes you, distorts you into someone legible but no longer alive. That distortion ends here. Now your pauses are protection. Now your silence is presence. Now your discernment is declaration. This is what integration feels like. You stop asking people to understand you and start standing in the version of you that no longer needs to be explained. The power is not in being understood. It's in being undistorted. You walk into a room and you don't shrink. You don't rearrange. You don't adapt your volume to avoid being too much. You watch. You feel. You calibrate, not to be liked, but to stay whole. Because intelligence doesn't chase. It sits, it listens. It observes the system, then rewrites it from the inside. And that's what you're doing now. You are no longer negotiating your instincts. You are no longer translating your bandwidth into signals they can manage. You are reclaiming your psychic frequency. Not everyone will hear it, but the ones who do will never mistake it again. This is not about being better. It's about being sovereign. Most people adjust to survive. You adapted to perceive. They seek comfort. You seek coherence. They learn the rules. You feel the architecture. They follow the map. You see the terrain. Sovereign people don't chase recognition. They move in clarity. They don't explain their boundaries. They embody them. They don't react to distortion. They let it expose itself and remain still. You've carried this weight your whole life. Now you know what it was. Now you know why you hesitated, why you tired, why you misnamed your patterns as flaws. They weren't flaws, they were functions. Functions of a mind built to feel deeper, think faster, and speak only when the truth was sharpened enough to land. You do not owe the world your dilution. You do not owe every room your total bandwidth. You do not owe anyone an apology for the speed, scope, or silence of your cognition. From now on, you don't mask your depth, you master it. That's integration. The moment your so-called flaws reveal themselves as the architecture of intelligence. And in that clarity, you stop bending, you stop proving, you stop translating, you stand. Okay, so this is what it was. Not awkwardness, not anxiety, not overthinking, but signal. A silent brilliance camouflaged as habit, a psychic precision mistaken for discomfort, a nervous system tuned to frequencies the world calls noise, but your mind calls it home. Now you understand. You weren't born to blend in. You were born to see through surface, through performance, through the systems built for noise, not nuance. Because every time you paused, you weren't frozen, you were scanning. Every time you stayed silent, you weren't unsure, you were translating. Every time you felt tired, you weren't weak, you were over-processing a world that never slowed down. This was never dysfunction, this was a depth. And now you hold the one thing no label can define. Clarity. Clarity, not as knowledge, but as refusal. Refusal to perform where there is no resonance. Refusal to compress your bandwidth into their comfort. Refusal to let your intelligence be diluted into acceptance. You've spent your life being misunderstood because you didn't have the words for your patterns. Now you do. Now you see the architecture of your own cognition, and it changes everything. You don't fear solitude anymore. You crave it because you know that's where signal gets clean again. You don't hate that you hesitate before speaking. You honor it because that pause is where accuracy sharpens. You don't rush to explain why you left early. You know now your nervous system ended the conversation before your mouth could. You don't need to be understood. You need to be true. And in this truth, everything rearranges. You see who you've been shrinking for, who only liked you when you were translating yourself for them, who called your clarity cold because it didn't bleed for their approval. Let them misread you. You're not here to be read. You're here to be felt. Not by everyone, but by the few who recognize stillness as strength, who see silence not as absence, but containment. This is the intelligence that no one taught you to name, the kind that isn't loud, performative, or credentialed, the kind that lives in pause, in pattern, in the ability to hold what others can't even see. Now, the habits that once confused you, they don't control you, they inform you. They don't isolate you, they differentiate you. Because to be highly intelligent is not to be always right. It's to be deeply attuned. And attunement is not something you learn. It's something you remember, or once the noise stops. So let the noise stop. Let them mislabel your silence. Let them mistake your withdrawal for weakness. Let them think your gaze is blank when it's actually cataloging the entire emotional architecture of the moment. You owe no one a simpler version of yourself. Your mind is not confusing. It is untranslated, and you are done translating. So what happens now? You walk back into the world, but you don't bring the mask. You don't perform stillness. You are stillness. You don't explain your habits. You honor them. You don't chase understanding. You embody it. This is the difference between being misunderstood and being unalterable. Let them think what they want. You're not here to be known. You're here to be undistorted. And now you are. So now you know. You weren't strange. You weren't broken. You were always tuned. You didn't fit because you weren't shaped for the surface. Your habits weren't dysfunction. They were data. Your silence wasn't absence. It was analysis. And now, you don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself recognition. The 11 habits weren't quirks. They were your blueprint. And now that you've seen them, you don't go back. You don't dilute. You don't chase. You don't explain why your intelligence doesn't look like theirs. Because it was never supposed to. You checked the locks. Not to feel safe, but because your intuition saw what logic hadn't caught yet. You weren't paranoid, you were perceptive. And now, you're not just locking doors, you're unlocking clarity. If this felt like being seen, it's because it was. But this was just internal clarity. Next comes external vision. The next video exposes the invisible architecture behind people's behavior. How to read them, not by what they say, but by what they flinch from, what they skip, what they perform, what they edit. Click here and see the emotional code most never detect. The ones who do. Don't get played. Don't get drained. Don't get surprised. They see what others reveal by accident. And after that, so will you.